Thank you for joining me today for Chapter 11 of Stories from Poplar Creek. It's been a pleasure sharing them with you, and after today there will be one more short story, an epilogue. Let's see what happens today as Margaret embarks on a new journey. I'll see you on the other side. Late summer moseyed on in, bringing a heat that decided to hang around a while. The world of Poplar Creek rose in the early hours to attend to chores in the cool hours of the day. By mid-morning, the heat announced itself in the sheen on people's faces, in the swish of cows' tails under the shelter of trees, and in the buzz of every flying creature. Scrubbing out the surgery took Margaret longer than she expected, and by the time she had finished, she couldn't shake the grime or the irritation. She decided to head up creek for a bath. She rode out, her broad straw hat catching the movement of the horse. She heard and smelled the creek before she found the path. The gentle burbling had been her lullaby for as long as she could remember. The moist, cool air tantalized her nose. She watched the movement of grass as small animals scurried out of the way of her approaching horse. She chose a spot with a tree overhanging the bank. The stream ran around a large, flat rock in the center of the creek. Margaret carefully removed her dress, socks, and shoes and tucked them safely under a bush. As she slipped into the water, she felt the heat of the day and the weight of her decision to leave Poplar Creek roll away with the current. She figured they would be waiting for her downstream, but for now, she was happy to let them go their way. She swam a while, then turned on her back, letting her arms sway like leaves on the water. Margaret let her thoughts amble and shift this way and that without resistance. So Suddenly, a noise on the opposite bank pulled her attention. Someone was whistling a tune, unconscious of any audience. She heard them drop to the ground, and then a splash. Before she made it to her side of the creek, a voice called, "Maggie, is that you?" "Emery's?" She found footing in the rock and climbed it, hiding herself, but peering over the top of it, trying to locate Emery's. "I'll swim out to you," he called back. Before she could find her voice to object, Emery's head popped up from the other side of the rock. "Hello," he said cheerily. "You stay on your side," Margaret demanded. "All right, I won't look." They swam together on either side of their imaginary line, letting the cool water draw the heat from their bodies. "This is amazing." "It's a perfect day," Emery's observed. "Let's float." Emery's took Margaret's hand. Their bodies stretched out on top of the water as they moved, the water curling around every finger and toe. The birds chirped lazily and the insects darted in the shallows. The world distilled down to this moment in supreme gentleness. When their toes had pruned, they crawled back to the top of the rock, letting the sun dry them out. They lay side by side, Margaret smiling as Emery's recited poetry. When the moment relaxed into silence, Emery's turned to Margaret. Her eyes looked into his. "I've never been quite sure you were an earthly creature," he said softly. "Would you be disappointed to learn that I am?" "I would be thankful," he said, "knowing you were real and I could be with you like this." Emery's leaned over and kissed her. He then stroked her cheek, moving a wet tendril of hair from her face. Margaret studied his face for any sign of humor or deceit. She stood suddenly, her chemise clinging to her skin, and dove into the water. Emery's followed her down. They reached the bottom of the creek, and Margaret pulled 2 smooth, bright stones. She popped to the surface and looked around to find Emery's. He slid to the surface just in front of her and pulled her to him. They bobbed in a single form, his arms cradling her. Margaret held the stones out to Emery's. He took one. He kissed Margaret again, feeling her heat through the fabric of his shirt. "You're leaving Poplar Creek, I understand," he whispered into her hair. "I'll be gone a year." Margaret kissed him again desperately. She felt his hands on her back and in her hair. "Margaret, we can't," he said, putting a little space between them. "You have a purpose laid out before you, and I won't be the one to deter you." "I'll come back to Poplar Creek." "To you," she said firmly. Emery shook his head. "I will be here, but I won't take that promise from you, Maggie. You are free to discover what you will. Then, if you come back to me, I'll know it's what you truly want." Margaret began to cry and buried her face in his shoulder. "Don't cry, Maggie. All will be right in the end, and today is a perfect day, remember?" He kissed her gently. Margaret stroked his chest and arms unconsciously. "Tell me about your school and what you're thinking," Emery's asked. Margaret let the words tumble out. Her secret fears of leaving home, wondering if she could navigate a new world. She let all her worries wash away as Emery's listened and kissed away the cobwebs. Lillian measured Margaret's waist and arms and determined to sew walking dresses and a formal white one for recitations. The 2 women worked side by side, cutting fabric and pinning the patterns. There was a strange sweetness in their shared silence, the occasional thread of conversation weaving its way between them. Margaret looked up. "Aunt Lillian?" "Hmm?" Lillian pressed seams and hemmed with a speed Margaret envied. "You've been so good to me. I've never said—" "You've never had to, Maggie." "I love you, Auntie." Lillian looked up and smiled into Margaret's eyes. "And I love you, my girl." Margaret watched Lillian finish a seam, already mourning the loss of these gentle mornings. The days dwindled. James took Margaret out for a ride. They shared stories and enjoyed the hills. The grass was browning, but the sunflowers pushed up, faces to the sky. Alice spent afternoons fishing with Margaret, peppering her with questions about college and boys. "I got a letter from Anahu," Alice shared. "The community has moved to new hunting grounds for the season. He'll be back in the winter." Margaret grasped that Alice and Anahu had formed an attachment. "What's Ma say about it?" Margaret asked gently. "Ma sees everything," Alice noted. "I'm almost 18, she added pointedly. "No one doubts your ability to think for yourself, Allie, but Ma has seen a bit of the world. She's there to help you, not stop you." Margaret and Catherine shared walks and talked excitedly of the new house Henry and James were building and of married life. Margaret had so many questions for her older sister. She told her about Emery's and how he made her feel. Margaret realized that Catherine had always been a compass, her North Star. "Oh, Kathy, what will I do without you? I can hardly think of a day when I wasn't traipsing after you or trying to keep up. What if I see a woman with gold hair on the streets in Philadelphia? I think my feet would just follow her home." Catherine laughed. "You'll be finding your own way. I have no doubt you'll navigate true." Helen kept furiously busy with preparations, as if the hours until her daughter would leave might spread out more slowly. She only cried at night in bed, where James could hold her. Margaret returned to town the next day. She'd spend her final night at the Turners to catch the early coach, which would take them on to the train station. Margaret finished her round at the surgery, stacking up the appointment ledgers with careful notations. She hung up her apron on the peg in the hallway, straightening it carefully. Then she made her way through town, stopping at the bakery for a hill of bread and the mercantile for a hairbrush. Every shopkeeper said goodbye with a gentle handshake or a murmured wish, and Margaret felt herself gathering the threads of their community with every step. She returned to the Turners, finding Isaac in the parlor, half asleep in his chair. He woke when she entered, folding his newspaper and gesturing for her to sit. "Are you frightened?" he asked. "Oh, not of leaving, just the being gone," Margaret said. "You'll be kept so busy the time will fly, I promise you that. It's a brave thing you're doing. It won't be easy. You'll find the men arrogant and dismissive. But you keep your eye on your purpose and don't let them convince you that you shouldn't be there. You hear? One other woman will be attending, a Miss Stevens. You two stick together. I've written her father and forwarded your name. If you need assistance, you see him. I trust him." The old trunk yawned at the foot of Margaret's bed. She had tried at first to fold and stack her clothing neatly, but there was too much to consider and too little time. Books, notebooks, the battered gray satchel from her father, talismans from her sister, and a small creek stone. Each item required acknowledgement, a moment held in her palm before it could be set inside the trunk. Her things finally ordered, Margaret wandered out for an evening walk. She watched the lights from the windows of the shops and houses. She glimpsed her dear people carrying on their evening chores. The street was quiet. She wondered what Philadelphia would be like. Bigger, she knew. Noisier? Her feet carried her at last to the meadow on the far side of the church. Emery saw her walking and followed her out. She ran to him, and they held each other under the moon. She began to kiss his neck, taking in the scent of him. He returned her kisses, his mouth hard on hers. She felt his wet face. "Oh, Maggie, Maggie, I won't say it. I won't bind you." "Say it, if it's true. I want to hear it." "I love you, but I won't be selfish with you. I want you to make the most of your time. You take that town with the ferocity that I love. If your heart's meant for mine, we'll find each other again, I'm sure." "I love you, Emery's." Kisses and caresses were laid tenderly under the silvery light. Margaret's skin shone and her eyes were bright. She felt Emery's strong arms and felt his pulse quicken when they touched. "You go now, Meggie. You need to sleep. Find me in your dreams." They parted silently. Emery's followed her shadow into the night. The next morning, Margaret's trunk was lashed to the back of the coach alongside other travelers' luggage and crates bound for the cities. She hugged sisters and her mother and kissed them again and again. Her father embraced her and held her a good long while. "My Meggie, grown, you come back to us, you hear?" She looked around to see if she could see Emery's, but she couldn't find him. Isaac helped her onto the coach. They took their seats, Margaret by the window, so she could take in every last drop of Poplar Creek. "I think I'm going to faint," she announced to Isaac. He laughed. "You didn't faint opening people up, and you think you're going to faint now?" "Well, now it's me being opened up." Isaac patted her hand. Mr. McCready took his place on top of the coach, a thought that comforted Margaret. Poplar Creek receded behind them in the dust. The road wound past the last of the houses, then through the sparse woods, where the hush of the day was broken only by the jostling of the wheels. Margaret leaned her forehead to the glass, feeling the bright sun on her skin and the cool of the window at her temple. She saw a figure walking the road out of the village, and as the carriage slowed at a bend, she recognized Emery's with his long, swinging stride, hands jammed in his pockets, head high. He caught her gaze, and his face brightened. He waved. She pressed her palm to the glass, heart thrumming. When the coach turned the corner, she lost sight of him, and the world felt both smaller and wider than before. Hours later, they arrived at the depot, and the coil of steam from the train drifted like a ghost above the platform. They found a quiet bench. Margaret watched in fascination as the other passengers busied about with their things. There were families and men and women of all ages. She wondered where they were going and why. It seemed a million possibilities existed on this one small platform. Margaret felt the pressure of every minute, her excitement growing. The train shuddered on the rails and the conductor called out for the boarding. Isaac looked at her. "That's us." They climbed the steps, vanishing inside the belly of the train. They found their seats and tucked their travel bags in the space beneath. "What do you think?" Isaac said. "It's a wonder," Margaret exclaimed. Isaac sat back and enjoyed seeing the world through Margaret's new eyes. "Uncle, how long will you stay in town with me?" she asked nervously. "I'll stay on a fortnight. We'll make sure your boarding arrangements are settled and agreeable. We'll have time to get you oriented to the town, and we're to have supper with the Stevens. You'll be able to meet his daughter, Adelaide. She's a bright young woman by all accounts, but she doesn't have your clinical experience. I think you'll be able to help each other immensely." Margaret's world was going to change enormously. What would she become? She hoped she was up to the task and that her own heart wouldn't break from the homesickness. Back at the Alder house, the old routine pressed on, although it felt as if the earth had tilted some. The light came in through the window at a different angle. Catherine made breakfast while Henry scratched notes for his sermon at the table. He always felt most inspired when in the company of his family. Helen filled the kitchen with the sweet, earthy aroma of baking bread. The morning was split by an unexpected silence, punctuated only by the sound of James's axe outside. As Catherine set the breakfast table, she froze. She suddenly turned and ran out the door. Helen's eyes followed her through the kitchen window. Henry ran to the porch. Catherine was bent over in the field, retching. "Helen?" Henry called. "I believe you're going to be a grandmother." Henry wet a clean towel and walked out to the field. He wiped Catherine's face and hugged her. Helen watched as Henry spoke some words to Catherine. He picked up Catherine and swung her around. "James?" Helen called. James was found out in the workshop most evenings after this. Helen would bring him food and see how wood mysteriously shaped into a rocker, a little bed, and a little high chair. He smiled easily and wondered at the sight of his daughter's growing belly. During the day, Henry worked at the finishings inside the little house that would be theirs. "They're like birds out there," Helen observed, "building their nest." Catherine smiled. "I got word that Ezra's bringing Eleanor down tomorrow. She'll check in on me." "Oh, it will be so good to see her," Helen said. "I think I'll make a cake." Summer leaned into fall, and then the snows came. Catherine kept active most days, but found that her rounded belly made some tasks difficult. She still managed to get on her horse, although the dismount was ungainly. One night at supper, James was unusually quiet. Helen glanced over, but didn't know what to make of the mood. "Kathy, I think it's time you stayed with both feet on the ground," James said as he buttered his bread. "Oh, Da, I'm fine. Please pass the peas." Henry handed her the bowl. Catherine rose. "I think it's time that you kept both feet on the ground," he said emphatically before rounding on Henry. "How can you let her continue to ride, Henry? Do you agree with it?" "Well, no, but she knows what she's able to do." The women headed for the kitchen, leaving the men arguing at the table. "Ma, what's gotten into them?" Helen picked up a towel and started to dry dishes. "Ma?" "Kathy, labor is hard enough without a broken leg. It's time to keep both feet on the ground. More walking will do you good." "Don't worry, Kathy. I'll make sure your horse is exercised every day," Allie offered. "For pity's sake," Catherine muttered. The earth started to open up, with blue flowers announcing another spring. The family assembled for the final opening of the new house. Neighbors who had supplied their labor shared in the meal. Henry carried Kathy inside. There, next to the fireplace, was the little cradle, its soft wood gleaming. Early planting included extra kitchen vegetables, and at night Henry would rub Catherine's aching back and legs and feet. She would fall asleep listening to Henry talking softly to the baby. Sarah rode out each Monday to walk with Kathy down by the creek. Seemed Sarah had a young man from Chicago. They had been corresponding, and he would come to visit to see how they got on. But soon enough April came. Eleanor was settled at the Alders now and would stay until Catherine's time. Ezra kept the Ingram twins busy with a steady delivery of messages to Eleanor. The month of May blessed the earth with every green thing. It was in the early hours when James woke to a sharp rapping on the door. Henry stood there. "I'll wake Eleanor," James said, grabbing his coat. Henry's face went white when he heard Kathy's screams. He sprinted inside and found Kathy next to the bed, crying. He supported her crouching there in the dim light. Eleanor and Helen arrived, and Helen set immediately to heating the stove. James paced the sitting room, grateful when Helen sent him out for more wood. Henry brought in more light for Eleanor. She checked Catherine gently, feeling her stomach. "I need to check inside of you, Kathy," Eleanor said as she washed her hands in the basin. Kathy nodded, taking breaths between contractions. "Well, this one is eager," pronounced Eleanor. "This may go far more quickly than most." When the next contraction came, Henry was there with a hand. "I want to sit up," Catherine panted. Eleanor nodded, and Henry helped Catherine into a squat. He sat behind her to support her back as her body did its work. Helen brought in fresh water for the basin, and Alice warmed blankets by the stove. Sweat beaded on Catherine's brow. "I have to push," she managed to get out. "Let me feel first. Breathe deep," Eleanor said, reaching down to feel. Catherine's body had opened, and Eleanor felt soft fuzz crowning. "Okay, my dear, you push." Henry would always remember the sight of Catherine. She was magnificent. Her legs trembled and her face was set fiercely. He reached down to catch the glistening body of his child. "A daughter! We have a daughter!" he wept. He placed the baby in Catherine's hungry arms. Eleanor tended to Catherine's body as the child latched onto Catherine's breast. Eleanor felt Catherine's uterus shrink into a small ball and noted with satisfaction that the bleeding had stopped. Henry looked up to see James in the doorway, transfixed. He wrapped the baby and took her to James. "Grandpa, meet Rose Charity Fisher." James held the baby close. He saw the soft golden fuzz on her head and the little pink mouth. "Hello, Rose. I'm so happy to meet you." Summer snuck in with all its charm. Catherine and Henry took a ride out to the far hills. James sat on the porch rocking Rose in the chair he had built for her for the purpose. He sang to her as he watched him. "Let me tell you about your family, little one. There was Ma and Pa, Fred, Edwin, and Rose.